Well, good afternoon and welcome back to Give the People What They Want. I'm Zoe Alexandra, the editor of People's Dispatch, and I'm happy to be joined once again by Roger McKenzie, the international editor of Morning Star News, and Prasanth R. We're back with a lot of stories, a lot of updates on some of the stories that we've been following the last couple of weeks, so stay tuned.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want. Your weekly movement news roundup.
Well, last week we spoke about the possibility of a ceasefire coming closer in Gaza, but the past several days we've seen a lot of setbacks, more aid massacres. Prasanth, what's been happening in Gaza?
Right, Zoe. I think there are two aspects like you talked about. One is the ceasefire. We'll get to that later. But one of the most horrendous developments over the past week has been what has been happening with those seeking aid. We know that Israel started the blockade of all humanitarian aid material on the 2nd of March, and thousands of trucks were stuck at the border crossings. They just wouldn't let them enter. A horrible situation in terms of hunger, in terms of other aid supplies. The kitchens shut down, the soup kitchens. There was no bread. A massive crisis. UN, RWF, all kinds of UN facilities, World Food Program facilities, all of them completely shutting down. To the extent that Israeli authorities actually began to acknowledge that even some of their most hardcore right-wing supporters were having a problem with this situation, and hence they began to say that, okay, we need to do something. And that was one of the reasons for what this weirdly named Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was set up. And now this GHF is basically a combination of US interests, Israeli interests, private contractors. It's like the worst combination. I believe the Boston Consulting Group was also involved. So the worst sectors across politics and economy combining together in the name of trying to provide aid to the people of Gaza. And as expected, it's been a complete mess, a very brutal mess, because they had very few points of aid distribution, and when people gathered in tens of thousands, obviously because of the fact that they have been so starved for aid, Israeli forces, of course, firing on multiple instances, including the reported incident on Sunday, which was, I believe, over 30 people killed and definitely more than 100 people injured. So what we're seeing is the weaponization of aid, and this is not me saying that. This is, I believe, the UNRW head who said that aid is being weaponized. We've got the heads of international institutions talking about the fact that this GHF mechanism is completely wrong. There's no other word to say that, because it is not neutral. It does not aim to provide humanitarian aid to the people of Gaza. And there have been, experts have pointed out that it is just basically meant to further Israel's war aims. So aid is being truly weaponized in that sense. And you have people who are, young children, women waiting for some kind of sustenance, who now risk being shot at because they are approaching those places which are supposed to give them that kind of sustenance. So truly horrible situation there. And like I said, the solution to this is very simple. There is no need for this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. There is no need for the Israelis to get involved. There is a decades-long mechanism involving the United Nations, involving other agencies, but they just have to be allowed to function, even in the midst of the war. But Israel has not allowed that. The US has happily stood by, and then there's this farce called the GHF going on. And the same farce, I would say, is also going on in the ceasefire negotiations, where there have been a round of discussions since the last week of May, and I think Hamas had a very simple set of suggestions, which the US initially seemed also to be kind of on board with. That let's call a ceasefire, 60 days. Let's exchange hostages and Palestinian prisoners, and after that, the Israelis withdraw during the time of the ceasefire, and then you discuss how to continue that ceasefire. Now, this seems the most commonsensical way of going about it. This does not even really challenge Israel's war aims. And if you want to look at it from an Israeli extremist perspective, even it does not even challenge Israel's war aims in any particular sense, but it is a sign of how much Israel is intent on continuing its genocidal attack. that it does not even want to discuss the possibility of continuing that ceasefire. Forget whether it will actually stick to it. But even the possibility of the ceasefire being continued or the possibility of withdrawing some more is not something Israel wants to consider, because it is clear that all Netanyahu's government wants to do is to have the option of continuing attacks wherever and whenever it wants to, of using this as an opportunity to maybe consolidate and launch a fresh round of attacks, maybe quell some domestic opposition, maybe save some face with some of their right-wing international supporters, some of whom are also maybe a bit uncomfortable. So that's all they're looking for, just another opportunity to maybe take a couple of days break or a couple of weeks break and then launch this full-fledged assault. And once Israel came back with this proposal, the United States, Steve Witkoff, completely went on that side and then said that it was Hamas, which did not want the ceasefire to take a hold, which is a completely absurd recommendation. I mean, I would encourage viewers to actually go and read the terms. There have various websites which are carrying the term sheets. And if you look at the term sheets, you'll see that how reasonable in this current situation Hamas's terms are, and how extreme, for lack of a better word, how brutal Israel's response has been. So, I mean, I think there's a more fundamental question here, that the Netanyahu government is very clear that it wants to go all out in terms of its genocidal. It's been clear for over now or since October, but I think each and every month has made that even more clear. The displacements, the blockades, the second round of attacks following the ceasefire, all of that have made that even more clear. So I think we need to see both this aid, the attacks on those seeking aid, the rejection of the ceasefire as part of this larger game plan of complete displacement, of ethnic cleansing, of genocide, which is really what Israel is doing.
Well, at the same time, there's also been a surge of solidarity with the Palestinian people. As we know, this past weekend, huge mobilizations taking place across the globe, as well as another freedom flotilla has just taken off. It's on day 4 of its journey towards Gaza with the simple aim of bringing aid to the Palestinian people and ending the genocide. This freedom flotilla has 12 crew members from across the world, including climate activist Greta Thunberg, MEP Rima Hassan. They've denounced drones sightings overhead, but they continue forward and asking the international community to project their voyage. So we'll be following that as well in People's Dispatch. However, the international community abandoning, problems that it has created and has facilitated is a common theme, which of course we've been covering on our show. Right now, there's devastating floods across Nigeria, which have cost already many lives. Roger, tell us what's happening there. What has the media actually been covering on this?
Well, the corporate media has barely covered this, and I think that's one of the issues around this. But it looks as though something around 700 people have died because of this flooding, but you wouldn't notice it from the kind of coverage that's been taking place. It's in a village called Mokwa, so that is around 230 something miles from Abuja, north central Nigeria, Niger State. And essentially what's happened is there's been a long dry spell within that area, and then massive rainfall, and of course the water's got nowhere to seep into, so it just lays on top of this really dry ground, and that's caused the flooding. Not only does it look as though something in the region of 700 people have been killed, but I mean thousands have been displaced as well. And this particular area is a real hub for the transportation of food as well. So there's going to be a knock-on effect to elsewhere within Nigeria as well. But I suppose one of the points that I want to make, apart from the really personal human tragedy that this is causing for the people who are affected by this, and flooding isn't something that's new to that area, but I think the extent of the flooding that we're seeing this time is something really new. But the point really is about, I think we're going to see loads more of these stories, unfortunately, because of the way that the the West has exploited Africa and the rest of the global South, frankly, and has insisted on continuing to rely on massive carbon usage in the north, and that's having a massive effect on Africa. It's having a massive effect on large parts of the global South as well. So unfortunately, this isn't going to be the last sort of time that we hear a story like this. And it really underlines the importance of the climate discussions that are going to take place later on in the year in Brazil, and the need for those discussions to actually come up with something that's going to hold those Western industrial nations to account and make sure that they pay for what they've done, and actually help the countries of the global South to actually cope with the devastation that they have actually caused. So sadly, Zoe, this is not going to be the last sort of time that we're going to have to cover a devastating story like this, but solidarity to all those communities who are affected by this flooding.
Yeah, and just important to note that in these COP discussions, one of the key demands of global South countries, and especially small island nations that have been racked by environmental devastation, have demanded that global North countries contribute what they actually agreed to contribute in terms of mitigation funds, in terms of reparations for the climate devastation. This continues to be an unfulfilled promise by, of course, the United States and other global North countries, which are the biggest contributors to climate devastation. So again, as you said, Roger, we'll be following that discussion in the upcoming COP30 in Brazil. Another story, hopping back over to the Americas, this past week, there has been an uptick in kind of these dramatic detentions of migrants in the United States. We know that the Trump administration promised, one of his big promises during his 2024 campaign was the deportation of 10 million to 15 million undocumented immigrants. This has been, a campaign that he has not really been able to fulfill, like many other of his campaign promises. Actually deporting 10 million people is not just something you can do at the drop of a hat. It's a long process, and his administration, a lot of the very far right kind of ideologues in his administration are a bit upset with the progress so far, which is essentially his numbers of detentions, arrests have not really exceeded the numbers of the Biden administration. And so, members of his cabinet have said that this needs to change and that about 3,000 people need to be detained on a daily basis. This directive has resulted in the increase of really abhorrent scenes over the past couple of weeks in cities and towns across the United States. There's a really high-profile case of a high school student going to volleyball practice, detained while he's driving to volleyball practice. There's been cases of workplace detentions where ICE agents have just raided workplaces, arresting dozens of workers. A lot of these scenes are happening, again, in places across the country. Federal agents in some states working with local police, in other states just federal agents coming in, but all with the stated purpose to kind of meet this quota set by Trump officials, again, in a lot of cases, violating very basic rights, violating different proceedings. We know that there's different detention centers that have actually been built to accommodate this increased number of detainees. In many cases, these detention facilities have been built, again, violating the law. So, and also, as we've covered on this show, the deportation of the hundreds of Venezuelan immigrants to El Salvador is part of this plan to kind of reconcile with the lack of capacity that the U.S. has for actually detaining this many people and carrying out due process. So in the case of the Venezuelan migrants, of course, due process completely violated, not given any sort of due process. They're trying to find different ways to circumvent the legal obligations that they have in terms of this deportation campaign. So many different immigrant rights groups have lodged legal challenges to what's been currently happening. Communities are fighting back against the abduction of their community members. We're seeing that again in cities, small and large, across the US. So this is surely going to ramp up in the coming days as administrators have said that really it has to. They have to continue detaining dozens and thousands of people on a daily basis. So we'll see how that progresses, what kind of resistance will kind of crop up in response to this massive attack on communities across the country. It's not just, people are in schools, they're in families, they're at different workplaces. So this affects not only the people who are being detained, but all of the people around them. And so I think maybe that calculation has not been considered by the Trump administration when they're carrying out such violent and abhorrent attacks, that actually people are going to be upset about this. So we'll see how that pans out. Continuing to, of course, follow all of the different moves by the Trump administration. And important to point out that the past week, there's been a lot of discussion over the domestic policy budget bill, which has seen also massive cuts to crucial state programs. We'll definitely be talking about that in coming weeks. That's also sparking a new wave of resistance, and even amongst people that maybe supported Trump. So interesting contradictions coming up in terms of Trump's policies. And his friends across the Atlantic have seemed to have scored some key victories, namely this past Sunday in Poland. We saw an important victory of the far right. Roger, what does this tell us about the state of affairs over there?
I could lapse into a load of vitriol about that. It shows us that we're in a really bad state, frankly. So Karol Nawrocki has been elected as the new president of Poland, obviously the front line at the moment in terms of NATO, where NATO stands in terms of its relationship to Russia and so on. But he squeezed home. It's quite a surprise, actually, in many ways, that he won, because on the first round of voting a couple of weeks ago, he was behind. And it looked as though the coalition or the candidate that was backed by the Prime Minister, Donald Tusk, was going to win. That's certainly what was expected. And even right up to election night, the polls, the exit polls were showing that neither of them are particularly left wing, but the mayor of Warsaw was probably going to win the election, but within hours he had to turn around and concede the election. So Nawrocki is basically a Trump fanboy. Just sort of even during the election campaign. During the election campaign, he flew off to DC and to have his photo took with Trump, and Trump's there with a big kind of thumbs up, giving him his kind of blessing and so on. And that's what they seem to, these kind of far right politicians are kind of doing at the moment, traipsing over to DC to get the seal of approval from their leader. So what does this mean for Poland? What does it mean for Europe? Well, the presidency of Poland in many ways is kind of ceremonial, but it has some really important asides to that. Number one, it can veto legislation, but also it gives a platform to whoever is the president. And Nawrocki is so he supports he does support Ukraine, but he doesn't support Ukraine joining NATO. So you've got these sort of contradictions taking place, really, about, all right, they've got a right to, Ukrainians have got a right to defend themselves and so on. But he supports a key plank of what Putin is saying there is a problem for Russia in accepting any deal, which is this idea that Ukraine can join NATO. So that is a real issue. But what Nawrocki brings to the table is this kind of far right, really kind of traditional, inverted commas, kind of view that many Poles seem to think is necessary at the moment. So very anti-LGBTQ, very anti. very anti kind of migration. All of that sort of stuff is part of this whole kind of move that he brings in. So we have to see this as part of this move that we see across Europe to the right. I think it's too weak to call it a drift, because I think it's much firmer than that. What we're seeing just this week, we saw the far right Freedom Party withdraw from the coalition in the Netherlands, which means that the government of the Netherlands has fallen, and that means there's likely to be an election there. And the far right are in a really strong position. They're running high in the opinion polls there to be able to make some gains there too, in a country that was once seen as being quite liberal, and so on. In Poland, Donald Tusk, the Prime Minister, he's called a vote of no confidence, or vote of asking for confidence from the Parliament for next week. His party still has the majority in Parliament, but he wants to, or his coalition has the majority in Parliament, and so he's gone back to there. He still has the power to be able to govern, but there is this complication that is really not going to get anything through Parliament that needs the signature of the president, that the president isn't going to sign. So we're in a turmoil right the way across Europe, I'd say. We've got social democratic governments, like the Labour Party in Britain, shifting further and further to the right because they feel that that's where they need to be. So the whole politics of Europe at the moment is pro-war, anti-migration, and anti the people, frankly. And this all raises the issue for us all as activists that we have to up our game. We have to make sure that we're organised for campaigning for peace and campaigning for the people. So it's going to be interesting over the next couple of weeks, Zoe, to see how this plays out in terms of Poland. But them being right on the front line with Russia is really, really important. So it's going to be interesting to see how that relationship plays out between Poland and Russia, and some of those other countries like Hungary as well. But dangerous times for us all, I think.
Well, accompanied by this rightward shift in European politics is also another concerning trend amongst European leaders with regards to the Western Sahara question. We've seen in recent weeks more and more governments seeming to accept and acknowledge Morocco's kind of claim over the territory. Prasanth, tell us about this shift.
Yeah, the latest is, of course, the United Kingdom, and Foreign Minister David Lammy actually went to Morocco and had, where he basically accepted Morocco's so-called autonomy plan for the people of Western Sahara. Now, it's important to note that a key driver, according to many media reports, is the 2030 Football World Cup, where apparently British firms are, because of this, will be in a pole position to invest, make some money out of that whole spectacle. Morocco is one of the co-hosts of the 2030 Football World Cup. So, but it's important to note that for Britain is the third permanent Security Council member after the US and France to shift its position on this. And I think we need to go back to the issue, because the United Nations describes Western Sahara as a non-self-governing territory, which is, very polite bureaucracies for the fact that they're basically colonized. And the people of Western Sahara have been colonized by Morocco for decades now. There was a huge anti-colonization armed struggle waged by the Polisario Front. And in 1991, I believe there was a treaty that the UN peacekeepers came in, and there was a decision that a referendum would be held so that the people of Western Sahara could decide what their future would be, which is, I think, the right of people. And all these years, it's been like how many decades? It's been like 3 decades now. But we have not seen that referendum being held. And instead, Morocco has mooted this proposal whereby where people of Western Sahara would get some kind of autonomy while being under Moroccan control, which, if you look at the Western Sahrawi people struggle all these years, is precisely the opposite of what they want. They're very clear in terms of their demands. There is, of course, a functioning government of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic. which has enunciated these demands. There are organizations, people's organizations in that territory which have made these demands very clear. And they're all very clear that they do not want Moroccan rule. But what Morocco has done, on the other hand, is use the resources of Western Sahara to tempt many of these countries. And when you say countries, we talk about the corporations, in many of these countries to come and invest. And so basically, it is selling the resources of the people of Western Sahara to make sure that the countries actually remain on Morocco's side. And Morocco, of course, also a very key player in the global coalition which has backed Israel way before. We know that it was one of the countries to sign the Abraham Accords in 2020, I believe, and Morocco and Israel struck this deal whereby Morocco recognized Israel and Israel recognized Morocco's control over Western Sahara. So it is a quid pro quo for the devil kind of a thing. And that is continued. But we've seen more of those countries. We've seen Spain do that. We've seen, I believe, the Netherlands, I'm not sure, at least one or two more European countries do that as well. Whereas the African Union, on the other hand, is very clear that it is not recognized that. We saw South Africa, we saw Algeria, all of them comment on the British decision, condemning it. So, just in some ways, it's very similar to the Palestinian struggle. And for, I think, old school activists of the left, especially, these two struggles were always seen very much in parallel, very much in common. Struggles by the people against colonialism, against domination by these very powerful US-backed, Western-backed, countries which are acting as agents of the former colonizers. In the case of Israel in West Asia, in the case of Morocco in North Africa, right? So I think that struggle continues to this day, and it's definitely going to intensify. The people of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic has intensified its legal battle as well. But I think that there is definitely an expiry point to how long Morocco can continue ruling over these people in pure defiance of their right to self-determination.
Yes, and there will be a piece coming out of People's Dispatch exploring some of these elements and speaking to in dialogue with Sahrawi activists. So look forward to that. And, to finalize our show today, I just wanted to talk about another, we try to end with a little inspiring, on an inspiring note, given the state of the world. Today, there's going to be a massive mobilization in Argentina, actually, probably when this is airing, it will be underway. A mass kind of united front against the Milei government, with many different social and historical struggles kind of coming into dialogue in this moment. Principally, of course, the pensioners who have their weekly Wednesday protest in Buenos Aires to demand that the Milei government increase the budget allocated for pensioners' payouts. We know that right now pensioners are essentially barely able to eat and buy medicine to survive. They're getting the normal kind of pension that they're receiving right now is about $300 a month, which of course in Argentina of today is really not enough to survive. People have been contributing their entire lives towards their pensions only to get to old age and feel that their money has just been taken away from them. The pensioners are coming out this Wednesday, and they're going to be joined by a lot of different social sectors that are converging to making this a kind of mass mobilization against the Milei government. It is also, yesterday was the 10-year anniversary of the Ni Una Menos movement, the feminist movement against gender-based violence. On June 3rd, 2015, it was the largest mobilization in Argentine history against violence against women. And so they're going to be taking the streets alongside the pensioners. And it's not just the feminists that are going to be on the streets, but also the different immigrant communities in Argentina. Last week, the Milei government issued a decree saying that immigrants would no longer able to receive healthcare and education as they had been receiving, and also tightens the restrictions for immigrants to enter the country, and provided more provisions for people to be deported and denied entry at ports of entry. And so They're also being hit in these latest attacks from Milei, but it's not only the migrants, the feminists, and the pensioners, but also hospital workers who have been in struggle for the past several weeks against budget cuts and undermining the budget of a really important public hospital in Buenos Aires. They have been mobilizing. They're also going to be on the streets today. So really beautiful and powerful representation of this multi-sectoral front that is necessary to actually confront these right-wing policies and governments. It's not just one sector is not enough. And they're all coming together on the streets today to say, no more chainsaw budget, no more attacks on people's rights. We spoke about how this is happening in Panama. Of course, the Panamanian people continue to be on the streets, indigenous communities, healthcare workers, teachers, construction workers. We're seeing it today in Argentina. Beautiful expressions of solidarity and unity, working class unity against the far right. Roger, you were saying that in Europe there is this, it's not a far right shift, it's a far right attack that's happening across Europe. And this is the kind of unity that actually needs to be seen in countries across the world, organized sectors, all sectors of society coming together and saying that our interests are actually united. The working class is uniquely impacted by these far right policies, and it's necessary to come together to confront them. So, we try to bring you good news. We try to show that, amidst this far right shift across the world, the working class is coming together, uniting in struggle. And even amidst the genocide, the horrific genocide in Gaza, people across the world, the Palestinian people are continuing to resist this. The Freedom Flotilla is sailing towards Gaza, determined to break the blockade. People across the world are demanding an arms embargo. So as we see this horrific devastation and attack on people's rights, there's always resistance. So hopefully we can end with that message of resistance and hope. And we'll see you next week. Keep following People's Dispatch, Morning Star News, and we'll be back with you in just a week.